Good morning, second graders. Welcome to another week of online learning. Today we're going to be on lesson 11. This is our lesson for April 27th. We're going to be learning how to read the k sound, spelled as CH. Before we get to our letter sounds, we're going to be reading our story for today. This story is called The War Starts. You can find this in your packet. It starts on page 2 of your packet, and it's going to go through page 5. So go ahead and get your packet, turn to page 2, and get ready to read along with me. Remember, during our reading, I will be asking you some questions, and you'll need to look back in the story, so it'll be really helpful to have that in front of you while we're working. I have on this slide that this is also page 30 through 37. That's the pages of the reader, so that's the pages we'll be using to cite text evidence right now. Alright, getting started on chapter 3. This chapter is called The War Starts. While we're reading, I want you to think about who did Madison end up siding with and what did that mean. Let's begin. Presidents have to make hard choices. James Madison had to decide whether to side with the war hawks or with the merchants who hoped for peace. In the end, he sided with the Warhawks, Warhawks. Madison asked Congress to declare war. On June 18th, 1812, the United States declared war on Great Britain. So again, looking at that paragraph, who did Madison end up siding with and what did that mean? Go ahead and tell me your answer out loud. Good, so they told us right here in the first paragraph that he sided with the Warhawks, and then that meant that Madison asked Congress to declare war. Let's keep reading in the second paragraph. While we're reading, think about why did the Americans think they would have a better chance of winning? The Americans were in for a hard fight. The British had a huge army. They also had the world's biggest navy. But the British were already at war with France. They could only send some of their troops to fight the United States. That was a good thing for the Americans. It meant that the United States would have a better chance of winning. So again, why did the Americans think that they would have a better chance of winning? Tell me out loud. Good. It's because the British were already at war with France, so they could only send some of their troops to fight in the United States. It tells us that right here. So since they were already fighting a war, they needed most of their men to keep fighting the war with France, so they didn't have as many of their troops to send to fight the United States. So we thought maybe we've got a better chance since we're not going to be fighting their entire army. Go ahead and take a second to read the caption underneath the picture that you see on this page. All right, let's turn to the next page. We see a bold word on this page, and that word is monarchies. That word is? A monarchy is a government that is ruled by a king or a queen. So let's see why that's important on this page. Even so, not a lot of people at the time could imagine that the United States could win. Today, the United States is a strong nation. It has been around for many years. It has a strong army and navy. But that was not the case in 1812. Listen to see how the United States was different in 1812. In 1812, the United States was not very old as a country. It had broken away from Great Britain only about 30 years before. So How was the United States in 1812 different from how it is today? Right, it wasn't a very strong nation, and it was pretty new. So now it's very old, and we're a strong nation. It tells us that right here. Right now it has a strong army and navy, but that was not the case. In 1812, it was not very old, right? But let's keep reading to find out how the U.S. was different from Great Britain in 1812. The United States had a different kind of government too. At the time, most of the nations of Europe were monarchies. That means they were ruled by kings or queens. A king or queen would rule until he or she died. Then, in most cases, the oldest son would take over. The United States was not a monarchy. It did not have a king or queen. Instead, it had a president. It had a president. The president was chosen by voters. He did not get to serve until he died. He served for 4 years. Then the voters got a chance to pick their president. If they voted for a different president, the old one had to step down. In 1812, most people in the world felt that the American government had a very strange way of doing things. They were not sure the system would last and that the United States would be able to arrive. So again, how was the United States different from Great Britain in 1812? Go ahead and look in the story and tell me out loud when you found your answer. Right, the United States was different because it did not have a king or queen. It did not have a monarchy. Instead, it had a president that people voted for. So that was a really new idea back then. Usually, these families ruled for a long, long time. But in the United States, it was a president, and the people, the citizens, got to vote for him. And if they decided they didn't like him, then they could vote for someone different who wasn't even related to him. Now we think that's normal because that's what we do all the time. But at that time, back in 1812, that was a really new and different idea. Go ahead and take a second to read that caption on page 34. Sorry, page 33. It's a picture of James Madison. And then let's turn the page. On this page down at the bottom, we see another bold word, and that bold word is forts. That word is? Good job. Forts are a large building that are constructed to survive enemy attacks. So forts were something that were built during the war to protect the soldiers. While we're reading, listen to see how you would describe the U.S. Army and Navy in 1812. In 1812, the United States did not have a strong army. In fact, the U.S. Army was tiny. It only had about 4,000 soldiers. The Navy was tiny too. George Washington, the first president, had set it up. He didn't think the United States needed a big navy, but just a small number of ships to protect merchants from pirates. So how would you describe the U.S. Army and Navy in 1812? Find the word that they used and tell me out loud. Good. The Army and Navy were tiny. They tell us that right here and right here. Both the Army and Navy were tiny. Listen to see what President Madison did about this tiny army. President Madison found a way to make the army bigger. He got farmers to join. Who did he get to join? Right, farmers. Many Americans were farmers. They used guns to hunt and to defend their homes. Madison called on these farmers. He asked them to grab their guns and join the army. Farmers were paid money and given land for joining. The U.S. soldiers were not well trained. Still, Madison was sure they could win if they attacked the British in Canada. He sent the army north to Canada. The attack on Canada did not go well. The army lost a string of battles. That means they lost several battles, lots of them. The United States lost forts along the border. The army was simply not ready for war. So again, what did President Madison decide to do about the tiny army? How did he get more soldiers? Good job. He found a way to make it bigger by getting the farmers to join. So he recruited farmers. But what was the problem with the army? He had enough people, but what didn't go well? Tell me out loud. Good job. The soldiers weren't well trained and they weren't ready for war. It tells us that right here. The army was simply not ready for war. Read that caption right there. It says soldiers in the U.S. Army. So that picture shows what they looked like back in 1812. Go ahead and turn to the next page. This is the last page of our story. Listen to see what happened with the Navy. So remember, the Army fights on land and the Navy fights in the ocean on the sea. No one expected much from the tiny U.S. Navy, but things went better on the seas than they did on land. The United States battled bravely. They beat the British in a number of naval battles. So again, what happened with the Navy? Tell me out loud. Right, so the Navy, they beat the British in a number of naval battles. So the Navy actually did surprisingly well. They surprised everyone. This caption says this is a picture of American men in the Navy during the War of 1812. So that's what the Navy fighters looked like. In your packet, starting on the next page, page 6, you're going to see this activity page. This looks really similar to something that we did last week. So you're going to read the statement to yourself. If it's true, you're going to write true on the line. Last week we didn't have the packet page. So last week we were just saying true or false out loud. This week you're actually going to write it on the line. So I'll guide you through this. I'll go ahead and read the sentences. You're going to write true or false on the line. If the statement that I say is something true that it did say in the story, you're going to write true. If it's something that's not true, they didn't say that in the story, they said something else, you're going to write false. Make sure that you're looking back in the story from your packet to put your page number. Use the page numbers 30 through 37, okay? Let's go ahead and get started. On June 18th, 1812, the United States declared war on Great Britain. Is that true or false? Write your answer on the line. Don't forget to put the page number where it says. Also remember, if I'm ever going too fast, you can just press pause on your video while you're looking for your answer, and then press play again when you're ready for me to read the next one. Number 2. Oh my goodness, this silly worksheet labeled it as number 1 twice. So this is the second number 1. In 1812, the British were already at war with France, so they could only send some of their troops to fight the United States. Is that true or false? And write the page number. Okay, the third one marked as number 2. At the start of the war, most people thought the United States would defeat the British easily. Is that true or false? Write that down and write the page number. Number 3. A monarchy is a nation that is ruled by a king or queen. True or false? And write the page number. Last one on this page, number 5. In 1812, most of the nations of Europe were ruled by presidents who were elected and served for 4 years. Listen to that one carefully. In 1812, most of the nations of Europe were ruled by presidents who were elected and served for 4 years. Is that true or false? And write the page number where you found your answer. Nice work. Go ahead and turn to the next page in your packet. Okay, now we're looking at page number 7. Number 6, we're still doing the same thing. Number 6 and 7, these are the same. So let's continue with those before I explain the next part. Number 6 says, in 1812, the United States had a large army and a very powerful navy. Is that true or false? And write the page number where you found your answer. And last one, number 7. At the beginning of the war, the U.S. Army attacked the British in Canada and won all of its battles there. True or false? And put the page number. Okay, nice work. Last part for our story. We're going to number these events in the order that they happened. So remember, that means whichever one of these things happened first in the story, you're going to put a number 1 next to that. And whatever happened next gets a number 2, then 3, then 4, then 5. So something that I usually like to do is I like to start with what I know happened first, and then I label what I know happened last with number 5, and then I work to figure out the in-betweens. So that's up to you how you do that. I'm going to go ahead and read you these events, and you can look back in the story and put them in order. Number 1, the beginning, through number 5, the end. Here you go. Today, the United States is a strong nation. The U.S. Navy beat the British in a number of naval battles. George Washington set up the first U.S. Navy. President Madison asked farmers to join the army. On June 18, 1812, the United States declared war on Great Britain. So go ahead and put those events in order from which happened first to which happened last. Now we'll move on to our letter sounds. All right, today we're going to be looking at the k sound. What sound? Good. We've already learned many different ways to make the k sound. Almost all of these on here should be familiar. We already learned that C says k, like in the word cat. We know that K says k, like in the word kid. We know that CK says k, like in the word black. And we know that double C says k, like in the word hiccup. Today we're talking about how CH can also say k. What sound does CH usually make? You remember? Tell me out loud. usually CH says ch, but today we're going to talk about its other sound, k. Let's look at some example words that we're going to sound out. This first word is s, k, oo, ul, school. Let's try another. K, r, I, s, Chris. This is the name Chris. Try the next one by yourself. Ready? Go ahead. All right, now watch me. E-k-o. Echo. Did you get echo? Nice job. Try the next one on your own. This one was a little tricky. You might have had to try some different sounds to get the right answer. This one sounds like this. A-k, ache. The E is silent. Try this one. This one is lots of syllables. Did you get stomach? Good job. This word is stomach. Try this one. Nice work. This word is anchor.